Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Flint's October 4th virtual Sunday service. I'm Raina Beck, the worship associate for today. Our ministers are Lynn and Jerry Kerr, and they'll be off today, taking a well-deserved rest. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism, we are a non-creedal religious tradition. Instead, we share many values which are listed on our website at www.uuflint.org. One of those values is the democratic process and compassionate and care for other people. And we're going to talk more about that today. And with regards to the upcoming voting process for our state. And it is from our pulpit today that we're going to hear Linda Hoff, president of the League of Women Voters of the Flint area, share with us information which we hope will inspire and inform us to safely vote. As we do believe in the democratic process in our congregations, governance, and in social structures. And many of us believe that voting is an act of faith and hope. Another act of faith and hope is financially supporting your faith community. And while the air was turned off this summer and now the heat is set low, UUCF still has water bills, trash, staff working overtime from home, and of course the cost of Zooming everything. It is not completely free. So please donate as you are able and if you wish to at our website or by electronic check deposit, or consider mailing a check to our church at 2474 South Ballinger Highway. We thank you for your support. We have some announcements to get out of the way this morning. For ongoing groups and committee meetings, please visit our website. And Aaron Rockefeller, the director of our faith development, needs our donation of time, money, and items for a trunk and treat scheduled for October 23rd, which will be Friday. You can reach her at erock@uuflint.org, and I know she will appreciate you sending her that email. Next Sunday, October 11th, is our second Sunday donation for Motherly Intercessions. This Genesee County nonprofit is dedicated to supporting the children and caregivers left behind when a parent goes to jail. For more information, go to www.unlocktheirfuture.org. Learn about their after-school program, their counseling, their meal service, their Saturday book club, and their jail visitation program. Wonderful things that keep children connected and to help support them in this trying time. Finally, you are invited to our virtual coffee hour where our speaker will answer your questions today. Sunday, Zoom code is 859-1497-8515, and we hope to see you there. And now, we invite you to take a deep breath and enter a space of peace and hope as Jennifer Howard begins our worship with music. invite you to light a chalice or candle at home as we light our chalice here today. We light this chalice for hope, peace, and love. May these life-giving forces overcome despair, violence, and hate. And now, if you will join me in reciting our covenant, recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service. We gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice. I invite you to join in a spirit of prayer or meditation, as is your tradition. And during this time, I invite you to consider the words of Theodore Parker, a 19th century transcendentalist, Unitarian minister, reformer, an abolitionist, and an inspired preacher. Quote, "The arc of history is long, but bends toward justice," unquote. This message from his impassioned writings and speeches was famously paraphrased by Martin Luther King. Both of these ministers spent their lives working to make bending of that arc happen a little sooner. I encourage you to consider creating a more loving, equal, empowering world now as our music for meditation is played. As a way of introduction to our speaker today, I wanted to do a little history lesson. Did you know that the Constitution of the United States did not set forth requirements for voting? But by tradition, only male property owners were allowed to have a say back in our early history. In theory, Black American men got the vote in 1870, but this was forcefully fought in many places, not just in the southern states. Women struggled and finally got the vote in 1919, and American Indians in 1924. Residents of the state, Washington, D.C., in 1961, and blacks and other persons of color had to wait for effective support to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. 18-year-old persons were allowed to vote beginning in 1971, with the idea that if they can serve in the military, they should be able to vote. Persons with disabilities have more, but still unequal access to our polls. And this is despite the Americans with Disability Act being around for over 30 years. Sadly, in the last several years, the surveillances put in place by the Voting Rights Acts in the 60s have been stopped by the Supreme Court and other courts because, quote, the problem no longer exists, unquote. Thus unleashing all types of voter disenfranchisement efforts since in the last 5 to 7 years. Purging of qualified voter files, poll closings, especially in poor neighborhoods, shortening of voting times in many states, and many other obstacles. We expect more of that this year, and we've seen it since the 2018 election in many states. Michigan's new law is helpful, but it's going to take some diligence for us to understand it effectively. Keep in mind that as a faith tradition, we highly support one person, one vote democracy. So voting is a tool in our democratic system to bend that justice arc a little more, and our new voting law will be explained in a very effective present by our guest today. We welcome Linda Hoff, President of the League of Women Voters of the Flint area, to our pulpit.
Hi, and thanks for letting me come here and talk to you today about voting in 2020 for the general election. We're going to begin this presentation with the requirements of registration. Those are statewide, obviously. Person must be at least 17 and a half years of age to get registered to vote. They have to know that they cannot vote until they turn 18. They have to be a U.S. citizen. They have to be a resident of Michigan. They have to be a resident of the city or township that they want to vote in at least 30 days prior to Election Day. Doesn't mean they have to wait 30 days to register, but they will have had to be a resident for 30 days. So important dates for you to remember in terms of voting in 2020 is September 24th, which has already passed, was the date that all the absentee ballots began being mailed to voters who requested them. October 19th is an important day because that's the deadline for anyone to register to vote in the 2020 election by mail or online. As of October 20th, people have to register to vote at their local clerk's office. And November 2nd is the tentative date that I have on the slide. That was just passed by our courts as the date that any ballot has to be postmarked in order to be counted for Election Day. It's a recent decision, and we expect that to be challenged in the courts. So honestly, we don't know what the outcome will be as the election year progresses. I will say, number one rule this year is don't procrastinate. So getting registered to vote. Methods to register. There are a few ways, a couple of them which are new and very innovative and very easy for people to be registered. First is automatic voter registration. Automatic registration began in November of 2019 as part of the Prop 3 in 2018 ballot initiative that we passed. Automatic registration means if you're a 16-year-old high school student getting your license for the first time, when you turn 18 on your birthday, you will automatically be registered to vote. Anybody who goes through the Secretary of State's office to update their driver's license or their state ID, whether it's at the office or online, when you update it, you're automatically re-registered to vote unless you decline to do so. And by paper form. Paper form is the old-fashioned way of doing it. Many people still prefer it. What I tell people is that your most secure and your fastest approach is to do it online. But if you want the paper form, we're going to go through that in a few minutes to make you familiar with it. The paper form does tend to open you to a lengthier process to get registered and potentially human error along the way because you're dealing with people to input the data for you. So online voter registration, it's easy, convenient, and safe, but only those people with a Michigan-issued driver's license or a state personal identification card can do any of the activities online through the Secretary of State. The reason for that is you've already proven your identity when you got your ID or your license. In-person registration opportunities. There are many, many opportunities to get registered through somebody in person. One is through your local clerk. You can go to your county clerk, and a lot of counties across Michigan, especially your more rural counties, the county clerk also does voter registration. But in Michigan, technically voter registration is done at the local clerk level. You can also do it at your Secretary of State office when you visit in person, but we're in COVID right now, so getting an appointment is very challenging. A Michigan agency that deals with public assistance can also help you get registered to vote. Unless you're willing to do it online with their guidance and you want to fill out a paper form, all they're going to do is take your paper form and send it to your local clerk. And then a voter registration drive, which is what the league is known for, voter registration drives. When we register people by paper, what we do is we take your application and we send it to your local clerk for you. Registering with a paper form. If you're registering by mail on your own, you have to remember to send a copy of your driver's license or state ID with your registration form. You also need to send a copy of something that shows your name and your address along with it to prove your residency. If you're registering at a voter registration drive, that copy of your driver's license is not required. I know, I didn't make the rules. But if you're using your Michigan driver's license or your state ID number on your application, they can access your record on file and connect it to the qualified voter file. You can also use the last four of your Social Security number. You don't have to use either one of those. You can submit it with either, but before you're allowed to vote or request an absentee ballot, you have to present yourself to your local clerk and you have to provide that proof of your identity and your residency. So proofs in the first time rule. So I started to say if you send your information in by paper directly to your clerk, or somebody does it for you, but you don't have your driver's license, you have to prove your identity and your residency before your first time voting. You can do that by visiting your clerk, bring copies of those proofs with you so that they know that you are indeed a resident and that you match your photo ID. Once you've done that, you can register by absentee anytime that you choose. The federal postcard is the method, and this is we're going to go through real quick, but that's the method to register if you're residing out of the country when you register for the first time. So if you're traveling or you're living abroad or you're even active in the military, this is your path to voter registration. When a person moves, many people don't realize, and I'm betting the people watching this, very few of you realize this, and if you do know it, kudos to you, but you have 10 days to register your change of address by Michigan law. 10 days that you have. So that only becomes an issue if you're moving within that same 30 to 40 days before an election. You need to remember to change that address. Otherwise, you have to vote at the address you were previously registered. So incarceration situations is a specific thing that affects a number of our population. Very simply, if you are in jail awaiting arraignment or trial, you have not been convicted, you can register to vote and vote by absentee if you choose. If you are in jail serving time for a crime that you were convicted of, your voting rights are forfeited until you are released. Once you are released from jail, your voting rights are automatically restored. But you need to be aware that they are restored at the address that you resided previous to your incarceration. So if you're moving to a new location, you have to file your change of address and make sure that you're registered in that process. This is a copy of the paper voter registration form that we talked about. And you see I've highlighted a few parts. We're going to go through the paper form very quickly just so you're familiar with it. Everyone should know that this voter registration form is a legal document. You complete it in blue or black ink. You have to write legibly. The signature that you put on this is very important because it will be used to match any future documents that you want to submit. For instance, when you apply to vote every time, or if you apply for an absentee ballot, they'll use the signature on file. So at the very start of the form, we have the qualifications of a voter. This, 90% of the time, if anyone's going to make a mistake, it's on this particular part of the form because they skip the part that says, yes, I'm a United States citizen, and yes, I will be of the proper age when I choose to vote. People miss those bubbles because they're not shaded, and we're taught to avoid shaded areas. Then you have to register. If you're using a paper form, you have to, and you're mailing it, you have to do that 15th day. So October 19th is the last day that you can submit a paper form by mail. It's also the last day that you can register online to vote. Beyond that date, so starting October 20th, you have to register with your local clerk in person. Now, the other thing is, in Michigan, we have a law that says that you vote where your driver's license says you reside. So one of the things you have to know is that if you put a different address on your voter registration paper form than is on your driver's license or your state ID, it will initiate a change of address, and you'll be sent a sticker to put on the back of your ID. You sign the form at the bottom stating that everything that you said was truthful, and then you're done with the form, or it's ready to be sent or submitted. Within 3 weeks, I always said 2, but I see now that the current recommendation from the Secretary of State is 3 weeks. So within 3 weeks of submitting your voter registration form, you should get a voter registration card in the mail. That's your cue that, yes, your registration has been processed and you are now a registered voter. If you don't want to wait the 3 weeks, you can always be checking online at michigan.gov/vote. That connects you to the qualified voter file for the state of Michigan, and you can see when your name appears. But on your registration card, please, please, please verify that all the information is correct. Your name is spelled correctly, it matches your ID, and your address is correct. Because if there are any errors on your card, you need to reach your local clerk and have it corrected before Election Day. So Michigan issued driver's license or personal identification card. A little bit more information on that. Your state issued ID card is your passport to adulthood. So if you are a young adult or an older teen and you're not planning to get a driver's license, that's a personal decision, and that should be honored by anybody. But it is important that you consider getting a state ID card, a personal ID card, because you'll need it for many things in your adult life, whether you want to open a bank account or get a lease or buy a car. You need to show some form of approved ID. Starting October 1st, 2021, it was originally October 1st of this year, but it was moved a year away because of COVID, you will need what's called a real ID before you can travel on an airplane domestically or enter most federal buildings. A current ID means that the voter registration remains current. So now, per Michigan law, from what we passed, you update your voter ID or your driver's license every 4 years. Michigan does not purge voters until they've gone as few as 5 years without voting. So it's 2 presidential elections and those in between. If you've missed those elections, you are subject to being purged from the voter rolls. So long as you keep a current ID or driver's license, that won't happen to you. So obtaining a Michigan ID card, there's a number of proofs that you have to present. They're the same whether you're getting a driver's license or a state ID card, and we're going to go through those very quickly. So number 1 is a Social Security number or a letter stating why you don't have one. These are all online at michigan.gov/SOS. Number 2 is you need proof of legal presence. So you have to have something like a bank statement, a transcript from your school, something that has your name and address. Step 3 is proof of identity. That could be a birth certificate. And step 4 is proof of Michigan residency. A lot of times that's something like a utility bill with your name and address. If you're not yet 18, or even if you're 18 but you're still living at home and you don't have something like that in your name, you can use your parents prior to your 18th birthday. So if you are 16 or 17, you want to be prepared, you get that ID and you can use your parents' ID, their utility bill as part of your proofs. So obtaining the real ID, if you have a standard one right now and you need to update it to a real ID, the way you'll know that is if you see a gold star in the upper right corner of your driver's license or state ID. If you don't have that gold star, you don't have the real ID. Originally, they thought people with an enhanced license or ID would be sufficient, but it came back that that was not the case. Everyone had to have a gold star. So step one is you make an appointment with the Secretary of State's office, and you see the website here, or you can call that number to make an appointment. Step two is bring the following documents to the Secretary of State. If you already have a state ID or driver's license, you take that along with one of these other proofs that just show who you are. Now, good cause fee waivers. For those of you that are on some form of, well, we're going to go through them. The next one's the financial one, the economic. If you're over the age of 65, so if you're one of those people that's no longer driving, if you had a driver's license your whole life, and I've checked with the AARP on this, and they said I'm right, this is the case. Maybe you stopped driving, you've let your license expire, because you just want to be tethered to that license even if you're not still driving, you need to make the switch to an ID, and you can get that for free from the Secretary of State if you're over 65. This is very important because in 2016, I saw one voter, got word back on one voter who was in his 90s. He was an irregular voter. He was purged from the voter rolls for whatever reason, whether it was irregularity or something else, but he was sent away without voting because his ID was expired. There was no way of proving, and he had been purged from the voter rolls. The new law keeps that from happening. So you need to just make sure that you have something that's current that makes sure that your voter registration stays current. Individuals who are legally blind obviously can't drive, so getting an ID is free for them. Those who wish to add or remove a heart insignia as an organ donor, that's free. And drivers who have had their license suspended because of a physical or mental disability can get a free ID from the state of Michigan. Now, the other good cause fee waiver is if you receive public assistance from the Department of Human Services through the Family Independence Program or the State Disability Assistance, or from the Federal Social Security Administration, from the SSDI program or the SSI program, you're eligible for a waiver of that $10 fee. That's $10 every 4 years, but you can get a waiver if you show that proof. Preparing to vote. I'm going to go back to that slide that I just slipped through. Preparing to vote, develop a plan. Number one, know what your plan is for voting. Know the rules on voting and know your rights. So michigan.gov/vote, that is your one-stop place. That is your main place to go and get information. And you can see everything that will be on your ballot. You can check your voter registration. You can apply for an absentee ballot. You can track your absentee ballot. Vote411.org. That's the League of Women Voters online voter guide. We update this, and it will be published by the time you see this. It gets published in about 2 days from now. The online voter guide does many of the same things that you see at the Secretary of State site, but we do one extra step. We connect you to that for a lot of your proofs for verifying your voter registration. But we ask candidates, every candidate in Genesee County anyway, we ask every candidate running for election right down to your school board to share information about themselves and answer a few questions that will help you decide if they'll be a good representative for you. Your voter registration card. Do you know where your voter registration card is? Many people have no clue. If you've lost it, you can contact your local clerk and ask for a replacement, but you should know that it's not required to vote. If you are an irregular voter or you're a new voter, it's always handy to take with you to the polls if you're going to go vote in person. Requirements for an approved photo ID. Michigan has a requirement that you have an approved photo ID when you vote. If you don't have one on you, you can sign an affidavit stating that you don't have one on you, and you're verifying that you are who you say you are. The only time this is a problem is your first time voting if you haven't shown an ID yet, in which case your file in the qualified voter file will ask the election inspector to please have you present that. So your first time voting, you really must have that ID with you, that proof. This slide shows you a variety of the different proofs that you can use. The qualified voter file is the master file for the entire state of Michigan. It covers about 7.75 million people in the state of Michigan. It's grown this year by quite a bit, about 500,000 people. It covers people in 83 counties, 220 cities, and 1,240 townships. Check the Michigan Voter Information Center to make sure your registration is current and accurate. When you go to michigan.gov/vote and you check your registration, you're connecting to the qualified voter file, or at least a part that you can view. You can't edit it unless, of course, you're a really good hacker. I shouldn't say that, but there probably are people out there that can do that. What is electioneering? This is something we frequently see when we're out poll watching. Electioneering are people who are trying to influence your vote at the last minute. It includes wearing a button or a ball cap or a t-shirt that says, vote Trump, or, vote Biden, or blue is whatever, anything that's going to try and influence a person's vote. Even if it's on a proposal that's on the ballot, you're not allowed to wear that into the polls. If you try and go in with some of those, you'll be asked to remove them. And if you're not, somebody's not doing their job. Requesting an absentee voter ballot. You can do it one of three ways. You can do it online, which is the safest, fastest, most secure way you can do it. You can do it in person with your clerk, or you can do it by mail through your clerk. This slide here just shows you all the many reasons that you used to have to pick from if you wanted to vote by absentee, and that is no longer the case thanks to the 80 of 83 counties in Michigan that passed Prop 3 in 2018. So to request your ballot online, michigan.gov/vote. You're going to be hearing this in your sleep tonight. But it can also be returned by hand, by mail, or by fax, even by email, so long as your signature can be seen and verified against the record that's on file for you. If your clerk maintains it, you can also be asked to put on a permanent absentee list. That doesn't mean you automatically get a ballot. It means you automatically get an application for a ballot. A ballot only follows an application. So you can skirt that whole system by just going online and requesting your ballot every time you want to vote absentee. That one goes straight to a ballot application. So absentee voting. Number one rule, don't procrastinate. Apply for your AV ballot online if you want it streamlined. If you want the security of it, you can go to your clerk, and you can still do it by mail. You just have to remember that mail is obviously an issue, and at every step, you have to at least budget in a minimum of 1 week for every process. That would be for your application to go in, for it to be processed and sent back, for your ballot to be completed and then sent back in. Each step, minimum 1 week is what we recommend. You can track your ballot online through michigan.gov/vote. It's such a handy site. So you mark your ballot, you return your ballot, you track your ballot. When your ballot is marked received, so there's three things you're going to see. One, the date that your application for an absentee ballot has been received. One, the date that your ballot was issued to you, either by mail or in person. And the third, when it was received. When it's marked received, it means that your signature has been checked and verified, and your ballot is in the queue to be counted on Election Day. That's very important for people to know. So check your status of your ballot if you vote absentee that week before the election. If it's not marked received, you need to get in touch with your clerk and verify why it's not marked received. You still have time to spoil that ballot and vote a new one if you need to. These are all the reasons that you can spoil a ballot. It's a handy-dandy table, and I'll make sure that your church gets a copy of this, and we'll also put it on our website. It's new. I only added it to the presentation yesterday. One is the voter did not receive your AV ballot. If your ballot didn't reach you, you can ask the clerk to spoil that one and vote a new ballot. And it has a timeline on it. You have until 2 p.m. on the Saturday prior to the election to ask that to happen. So that's why it's important you check it. You can request the new ballot up to 4 p.m. on the Monday prior to the election. So 4 p.m. the day before the election is the last time you can ask to have that ballot replaced for an absentee voting. If you received your ballot and you want a new one, you spilt coffee on it, you made a mistake, you didn't submit it, you just want to get a replacement. The same timeline, 2 p.m. that Saturday before the election, 4 p.m. that Monday before the election. The third case is you actually completed your ballot and you sent it in. Yay, but then you changed your mind or realized, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, I understood this proposal wrong, and you want to change your vote. You can do that. Same timeline, 2 p.m. that Saturday prior to the election, or in person up until 4 p.m. on the Monday the Monday just before it, okay? So each case, it's 2 p.m. that Saturday to spoil it, 4 p.m. that Monday to get it back into your clerk. If they spoil it and you want to vote in person, you can tell them that. Spoil that one, I want to vote in person. Okay, so you have options available to you. And it's confusing, I know, but it's meant to make your vote uncompromised so that you have every opportunity to make sure your voice is heard on Election Day. If you have questions, you can always contact the League and we'll help explain it to you. Absentee voting, assistance in voting. Any person, if you're voting at home or at the polls, can ask for assistance. You can have a family member, a friend. A lot of people, we have a number of people that do not know how to read. If you're one of those and you're embarrassed by it, you can just take a family member, a friend with you. It cannot be your employer, an agent of your employer, a union member, or an agent of your union. Those are the only criteria. Other than that, you can take somebody that you know and trust with you or have help you with your ballot before you submit it. If you're at the polls and you need assistance, I don't know, maybe you got your eyes examined that day and you're still dilated and you can't read, because that always happens to me when I get mine dilated. The election precinct has to take 2 people that help you with your ballot. One is to represent each of the 2 major parties. They're there to help make sure that the other person's keeping everybody honest. It's all meant, again, to protect your vote and make sure that your vote is indeed your own and not influenced. Who may handle the ballots? This is a little bit longer, and rather than read you the ballot, I'm just going to say the big thing is not just anybody can handle your ballot. Typically, they want it to be a family member or someone who lives in your household. You can direct somebody else. They have to sign a form, though, if you dedicate that ballot into somebody else's hands, because keeping your ballot safe and secure and uncompromised is the #1 goal that everybody wants for Election Day. Potential hiccups at the polls. There's always something that's going to happen. Prevention. Murphy stays away if you just are ready for anything that happens. So what triggers? #1 is a provisional ballot. What triggers a provisional ballot? It could be that your name isn't found in the qualified voter file. Now, if you did that homework and went to michigan.gov/vote, you'll know if that's the case. It could be that your photo ID, the election inspector didn't believe that it was you. Maybe you don't look like your picture anymore. For women more than men, that's usually the case. Maybe our hair color changes, or there's been a flag in the qualified voter file. So sometimes you're asked to provide extra proofs. There are 2 types of provisional ballot. One's called an affidavit, the other one's an envelope. If you qualify for an affidavit, and it's based on some questions I'm going to show you, you get to cast your ballot on Election Day and have it tabulated immediately. If you need an envelope ballot, it means that your situation requires a little bit of investigation, or you need to provide some more information to the clerk's office. If that's the case, you still vote your ballot, but you have a certain number of days, 6 days, to provide the proofs that they need. The clerk has 7 days to let you know if your vote was counted, and if it wasn't counted, why. Part of the process of doing a provisional ballot is making sure that the information is on file so you never have that problem in the future. So the questions that determine if you get a provisional ballot, very simply, did they confirm through the electronic qualified voter file that you were registered someplace? Whether you were registered in another precinct or that precinct, did they check the qualified voter file online? Do not trust the paper books. Paper books, I'm sorry, are prone to too many errors. Do not trust the paper books. But where the electronic QVF says that you are registered to vote is where you are expected to vote on Election Day. Can the voters show that they reside in that precinct area? So someone says, oh, I don't see you in this. Can you show proof that you do live in that area and that you've lived there for that 30 days? Can you show evidence of having lived in there for the 30 days? So you have to show the proof of identity, and you have to show that you've been there for 30 days and that you did file that change of address when you moved in if it was recent. Observers at the polls. Oh, sorry, I took that one out. I'll go back because I said it. Observers at the polls. It's not a hiccup. They're there just to kind of monitor what's going on. The League is one of the groups that often sends people to voting precincts We call it, when we train people, we tell them they're the flies on the wall. They're there to watch and monitor everything that's going on and report it back to us. That's how we know where we need to do voting advocacy. It's a lot based on what we see at the polls. Challengers. The job of a challenger, frankly, is to intimidate voters. I mean, if you ask any challenger, they'll tell you, well, no, our job is very valuable. They want to ensure integrity. But the reality is challengers are intimidating to a voter, especially if it's like your first time being challenged. They can be authorized by a political party. They can be part of an organization. They can be part of an organized group of citizens. They cannot be authorized by a candidate and representative of a candidate. Challengers are never, ever allowed to directly speak to a voter. That's the number one rule that they have to live by. If they want to create a challenge for any voter, they have to talk to the poll worker that's in charge and say, I have a challenge for this voter. But what can that challenge be? There are a few allowable challenges. One of them is the residency, whether your address is correct or whether you have been a resident for the 30-day requirement, whether or not you are of the appropriate age to vote, whether you've already received an absentee ballot, because they will watch for that. If you've been issued an absentee ballot and you show up to vote in person, they're going to question that. And if they have good cause, and there's a variety of things that you're in the wrong precinct, that's something like that, they can challenge, but it has to be something legitimate. Nonvalid challenges. A voter without a photo ID is not a challengeable cause. They can't say this person didn't present a photo ID, they can't vote. A belief or impression, that can be based on race or language, attire, any number of things. That is not a legitimate challenge. Nor can they challenge somebody for physical or mental disability or a perception of appropriate physical or mental impairment. If you are challenged as a voter, you will be asked to take an oath that you're going to be telling the truth as you respond to answers. So it goes in a special envelope, but it's all part of the process. It's all aimed at trying to keep the process clean and conflict-free. So yes, it can be intimidating, and you never want to be the person, well, most people don't want to be, some people like standing up to a little bit of a challenge. Most people don't want to be challenged when it comes to their ballot. So don't let it intimidate you. Don't let it keep you from voting. The election inspector is there as your advocate, but they're there to also make sure the system is followed correctly. Going to the polls. Now we get to the easy, cheesy stuff. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on election day. If you show up and your poll is not open at 7 a.m., you report it to the election protection group, and they look into it right away. If you are in line, not on your way into a building, but in line by 8 p.m., no matter how long that line is, in Michigan, you get to vote. You have to be in line. If there's a line, the precinct coordinator will probably put one of the election workers at the end of the line starting at 8 o'clock, and no one is allowed in line after that person. So you have to be there. Again, don't procrastinate. But we all forget things, right? Prohibited activity, electioneering again. You're going to see outside every polling location, there's a 100-foot zone that should be marked. You're going to see people trying to influence you before you walk in. Within that 100-foot zone, none of those people can approach you. If somebody does, you need to report it to the election inspector inside the building, and you can call the 866-OUR-VOTE number and report it as well. No one is allowed to approach a voter on their way into a voting precinct within that 100-foot zone. So you know that you're protected. But if they hand you materials, which often they do, a little pamphlet or something, used to be, sorry, my computer's looking to do an update, file folders, yardsticks. Back in the day, they gave all kinds of things out. I don't think most candidates do that anymore, but you're not allowed to take those into the voting precinct with you, because then you would be legitimately electioneering. So just know, if they hand you something, you can either decline it or shove it in a bag or something, but it cannot be visible. When you get into the voting precinct, you're going to see little slips of paper. They're about 4 inches by 3 inches or so. That's your application to vote. And typically there's just a bunch of little pencils. And I always find it amazing that a legal document, because this is a legal document, you can use a pencil on election day, but you can. You just fill out your name, your birth date, your address, and you sign it and date it. When you go to check in with your application to vote, they're going to ask for your ID. If you did not bring an ID with you, you can sign an affidavit. Signing the affidavit affirms that you are who you say, who you're presenting yourself to be, that you're not lying. What's important to know is if you happen to say, I don't like this rule, I'm not giving you my ID, and you admit to having one on you that you refuse to present, you will not be given an affidavit because that would be illegal. It would be suborning perjury. If you tell somebody that you have an ID you don't want to give them, they cannot give you an affidavit. So at that point, you're stuck giving them an ID if you want to vote. This is a copy of what the affidavit form looks like. It's very simple. A lot of people have it printed right on the back side of the application to vote. Steps in voting. This is a recap, very simple. Before you vote, know what's going to be on your ballot. You can see it at michigan.gov/vote. You can see it at vote411.org. Do not carry or wear electioneering materials. Check that you're in the correct precinct. Complete your application to vote. Provide your ID or sign the affidavit. Complete your ballot. Okay. Then you go to the tabulator. Michigan got all new tabulators just a couple years ago. Tabulator is very easy to use. If you make a mistake in voting, you overvote, you undervote, you smeared something, the tabulator is going to flag it and tell you that you have an error and where the error is. At that point, you have an option to correct it, spoil that ballot and correct it, or if you undervoted, you could complete them, or you can just say, take my ballot as is. If there's unclear, so for instance, you overvoted in a category, maybe for a township trustee, you voted for too many candidates, it will void out that race if you tell the tabulator to accept your ballot as is, because they won't know which of those candidates you actually want. So those are your choices to make, but the tabulator is very, very easy to read. If you need assistance, you can ask the election inspector that's manning the tabulator to show you. At all times, your ballot should be kept secret and secure. If you want to spoil your ballot, you can ask to have it spoiled and ask for a replacement. There are no limits to how many times you can make a mistake. People might get frustrated with you after your third or fourth or fifth time, but there are no limits. Once your ballot is in the tabulator, your vote is cast. There's no turning back at that point. So other important information real quick, voters with disabilities have rights. One thing, every precinct location, not every precinct, but every location has to have a ballot marking device. Your clerk's office also has that ballot marking device. So if you are a person that needs assistance completing your ballot, you can use that machine. It will read the ballot to you. It will enlarge the font. It has a lot of abilities to help you. Anyone in the public is welcome to use that machine, but if it's a busy election day, please keep it available to people with a disability that truly needs it. If you're interested, try it out in a small election. So when we have our school boards or our school elections for millages and stuff, usually in May, that's a good time to introduce yourself to that machine. I already went through other people needing, being able to help you or getting assistance from election inspectors themselves. What's at stake? This is a list of a number of the offices that are at stake in 2020. Right down to ballot initiatives and where you can get more information. Obviously, the League of Women Voters, the Secretary of State's office, Federal Voting Assistance Program, Election Assistance Commission, and more. If you need more information, by all means, get a hold of us and we'll help lead you to the right source. And then questions. I will be here available during the coffee hour question period. So hopefully you've thought of a few things that maybe I wasn't clear on. Hopefully I was pretty clear, but maybe you got something out of the box I didn't cover. I'm happy to answer them when you ask the question. Thank you.
Our closing words today are going to be sung. The song is Bread and Roses from the suffragette movements of about 100 years ago and labor union activities. This is performed by our own Edie Robbins and Jennifer Howard.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, 1,000,000 darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill-lofts gray, our For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Please join me at home in reciting our regular words as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen, and have a blessed day.